I never thought I'd be the one posting here, but life's got a funny way of turning upside down when you least expect it. My name's Eric, and my wife, Julie, and I have been married for 8 years. On paper, we've had a pretty solid life. Great jobs, 2 beautiful kids, and a cozy suburban home. I always thought we were one of those couples who had it all figured out. Until last week. It all started when Julie asked if we could host a dinner for her parents and some close friends. She said it had been a while since we'd entertained, and it would be good to catch up with everyone. Julie was always big on family gatherings, so I didn't think much of it, until things started to feel off. For starters, Julie was way more invested in the details than usual. She spent hours perfecting the menu, hiring a private chef, something we'd never done before, and even getting the house professionally cleaned. I chalked it up to her wanting to impress her parents, who've always been a little particular. But the real kicker was when she bought a new dress. Sleek, black, and a little more revealing than her usual style. Looks like someone's trying to wow the crowd. I joked, but she just laughed it off, saying, "I just want to feel good tonight. That's all." Her tone was light, but something about the way she avoided eye contact stuck with me. The evening arrived, and everything went smoothly at first. The house looked perfect, the food was amazing, and Julie was glowing. She really did look stunning in that dress. Her parents were impressed, her friends were chatty, and for a while I let myself enjoy the moment. But every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at her phone or sneaking quick, whispered conversations with her best friend, Lydia. At one point, I saw her phone light up with a text, and she grabbed it so fast, you'd think it was on fire. Curiosity started gnawing at me. Was she planning some sort of surprise? A trip? Maybe? An anniversary celebration? Our 9th anniversary was just around the corner, and Julie loved surprises. But then, during dinner, something happened that shifted the mood entirely. Julie's ex-boyfriend, Mark, walked into the room. Now, before you think the worst, let me explain. Mark is a longtime family friend, and Julie's parents still adore him. They invite him to events occasionally, which I've always been fine with because, honestly, the guy doesn't bother me. He's one of those overly charming types who always has a story to tell but never quite grew up. The guy peaked in high school, if you ask me. Julie was visibly startled when he showed up. "Mom, you invited Mark?" she said, her voice a little too high-pitched to sound casual. Her mom just laughed, waving it off. "He's practically family, dear. Besides, he hasn't seen the kids in ages." Mark greeted everyone like he owned the place, laughing and shaking hands. When he got to me, his grin was so wide, I could count his teeth. "Eric, long time, man. Julie tells me you've been keeping her busy." He clapped me on the back, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if he was joking or something else. Throughout the night, I noticed Mark and Julie exchange a few glances. Not long, not obvious, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in my mind. I told myself I was overthinking it, paranoia fueled by an extra glass of wine. But then Lydia pulled Julie aside, and the two of them disappeared into the kitchen for what felt like forever. When they came back, Julie looked flushed, like she'd just run a marathon. "Everything okay?" I asked her, but she just smiled and kissed my cheek. "Of course, babe. Stop worrying so much." I let it go, for now. But something about that night stuck with me. It wasn't just Mark's surprise appearance or Julie's odd behavior. It was the feeling that I was missing a piece of the puzzle, and I was determined to find it. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. That's the thing about suspicion. It sneaks up on you, whispers in your ear, but never gives you the full picture. The morning after the dinner, Julie was unusually chipper. She hummed while making breakfast, kissed the kids on their foreheads, and even packed my lunch, something she hadn't done in years. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was trying to overcompensate for something. As I sipped my coffee, I casually asked, "So, what did Lydia have to say last night? You two were pretty inseparable for a while there." Julie froze just for a second, barely long enough for most people to notice. But I did. "Oh, nothing important," she said with a shrug. "She was just asking me about work stuff. You know, Lydia, always stressed." It was a decent enough answer, but something about the way she said it, forced, like she'd rehearsed it in her head. I dropped it for the moment, but that seed of doubt kept growing. Later that day, while Julie was out running errands, I decided to tidy up the house. I know, sounds like I'm angling for husband of the year, but honestly, I was looking for anything, that could explain why my gut was telling me something was wrong. That's when I found it. In the kitchen, tucked behind the microwave, was a small piece of paper folded into a tight square. It was weird because we never keep anything back there. Curious, I unfolded it. It was a receipt from a hotel. And not just any hotel, the Sunrise Inn, which is about 30 minutes outside of town. The date on it? 2 weeks ago. The receipt wasn't for a room, though. It was for 2 drinks from the hotel bar. A gin and tonic and an old-fashioned. Total, $28. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Julie hates gin. Now, I don't know what kind of idiot leaves a receipt like that lying around, but I was both grateful and pissed. What was she doing at a hotel bar 2 weeks ago? And with who? I thought about calling her right then and there, but I stopped myself. If she was hiding something, she'd just lie. I needed more information. The next step was to figure out how this tied to Mark. I didn't want to assume, but let's be real. His sudden reappearance at that dinner felt like more than a coincidence. So, I did what any self-respecting, suspicious spouse would do. I checked her phone. Before you come for me, hear me out. I know it's not the most ethical move, but I needed answers. Julie's always been a private person, so her phone was password protected. Luckily, I'd seen her punch in her code 1,000 times. 1-9-9-2. Her birth year. I scrolled through her texts, starting with Lydia. Nothing. Their conversation was exactly what you'd expect. Gossip about mutual friends, memes, and a random discussion about shoes. But then I saw Mark's name. My stomach dropped. There were only 2 texts. Mark, you were amazing the other night. Can't stop thinking about it. Julie, keep it to yourself. You know how careful we have to be. The timestamp on those texts? The morning after the hotel receipt. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My brain raced to connect the dots. This couldn't be happening. Julie wouldn't do this to me, to our family, but the evidence was right there in front of me. I heard the garage door open. Julie was home. I quickly locked her phone and shoved it back where I found it. My hands were shaking as I tried to compose myself. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more. Julie walked in with a bright smile, a bag of groceries in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. Thought we could brighten up the house a little, she said cheerfully. I forced a smile. They're beautiful. But all I could think was, who are you really buying these flowers for? Julie had recently joined a new gym. She called it her self-care routine and was suddenly all about fitness classes and me time. At first, I thought it was great. She deserved to take care of herself. But now, in the context of everything else, it felt like another piece of the puzzle. So, one evening, while Julie was at her yoga class, I decided to swing by the gym to see if I could catch her in the act. And no, I'm not proud of this. I've never been the kind of guy to spy on his wife, but I was desperate for answers. When I got to the gym, I parked across the street and waited. It was a massive building with floor-to-ceiling windows, so I could see a lot of what was happening inside. Groups of people were working out, chatting by the smoothie bar, or stretching in yoga studios. I scanned the room for Julie, and after a few minutes, I spotted her. She wasn't in a yoga class. She was sitting at the smoothie bar, laughing with someone. A man. Even from a distance, I could tell it wasn't Mark. It was someone else entirely. He was tall, muscular, and wearing a tank top that practically screamed personal trainer. He leaned in close to Julie, and she playfully smacked his arm, laughing at something he said. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not what she told me she was doing. I watched as they finished their drinks and got up to leave together. Julie glanced over her shoulder, almost as if she was checking to see if anyone was watching, and the 2 of them walked toward the parking lot. My heart was racing as I started my car and followed at a safe distance. They didn't go far, just a few blocks down to a small, dimly lit cafe. I parked a few cars away and waited, watching them through the window. They sat at a corner table, their heads close together. From where I was, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language was unmistakable. Julie was leaning forward, twirling her hair, and smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. After about 20 minutes, the man reached across the table and touched her hand. Julie didn't pull away. I couldn't watch anymore. I drove home, my mind racing. First Mark, and now this mystery guy. How deep did this go? Was she juggling multiple affairs? Or was this guy just some new friend she hadn't told me about? When Julie got home later that night, she acted like everything was normal. Yoga was great, she said, casually slipping off her sneakers. I'm feeling so much more centered these days. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and muttered, "That's good." The next morning, I made a decision. If Julie was hiding something, she was bound to slip up eventually. And when she did, I'd be ready. I installed a tracker on her car. I know, it sounds extreme, but at this point, I felt like I had no choice. I needed to know where she was going and who she was meeting. The tracker would give me real-time updates, and I could check her movements against what she told me. For the next few days, I tried to act as normal as possible. I didn't bring up the gym or the cafe. I didn't mention the tracker. But every time Julie left the house, I got a notification on my phone, and I'd quietly check to see where she was going. And that's when I saw it. Friday night, Julie told me she was meeting Lydia for drinks. But the tracker showed her car parked in front of the Sunrise Inn, the same hotel from the receipt. I sat there staring at my phone, my heart pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I tracked Julie to the Sunrise Inn, the same hotel from the mysterious receipt I found earlier. Seeing her car parked there made my stomach drop. But I wasn't about to sit back and let her lie to me again. I pulled into the lot, parking far enough away that she wouldn't notice my car. Her black SUV was parked near the side entrance, and I could see the faint glow of a neon bar and lounge sign above the door. I sat there for a minute trying to decide what to do. My hands were shaking. Was I really going to do this? Confront her in public? What if it wasn't what it looked like? But deep down, I knew. I'd known for weeks. I got out of the car and headed inside. The bar was dimly lit, with a handful of people scattered at tables and booths. It didn't take me long to find her. She was in the corner, sitting across from someone. Not Mark. Not the guy from the gym. This was someone new. He looked older, mid-40s maybe, with graying hair and a suit that screamed money. They were leaned in close, talking quietly. Her hand was on his arm, and he was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. My chest tightened. I walked closer, staying out of her line of sight. I ducked behind a pillar and watched as the man slid something across the table. A small box. Julie opened it, and even from a distance, I could see the glint of a diamond bracelet inside. She smiled, that radiant, heart-stopping smile that used to be reserved for me, and slipped it onto her wrist. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to storm over, flip the table, demand answers, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed to keep my cool, to figure out exactly what I was dealing with. So, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them. I stepped back outside into the cool night air, trying to breathe. That's when I saw him. Mark. He was standing by the hotel's side entrance, smoking a cigarette. He hadn't spotted me yet, so I ducked behind a parked car and watched as he pulled out his phone. A few seconds later, I got a notification. Julie's car was moving. I whipped around and saw her SUV pulling out of the lot. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. She must have seen my car and was trying to make a quick getaway. I jumped into my own car and followed her. But here's the twist, Reddit, she didn't go home. Instead, she drove to a house on the other side of town. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, with a small front yard and a single porch light illuminating the driveway. She parked, got out, and walked up to the door. The man from the bar opened it. They hugged, and then, right there on the front steps, they kissed. Couldn't breathe. I sat there in my car, watching as she disappeared inside with him. My mind was spinning. Was this her lover? Was this where she'd been sneaking off to? And who the hell was Mark doing at the hotel if he wasn't meeting her? There were too many questions and not enough answers. I stayed parked outside that house for hours, waiting for her to come back out. But she never did. When I finally got home, it was nearly 3 a.m. Julie's side of the bed was empty. She hadn't even bothered to come home. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece it all together. One thing was clear. This wasn't just one affair. Julie was playing a game, and I had no idea how deep it went. But I was going to find out. After catching Julie at that guy's house, I barely slept. My mind was a mess. So many questions, so few answers. But I knew one thing. This wasn't just about her lying. There was something much bigger going on here, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. The next morning, Julie came home. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when she walked in. Her hair disheveled and her clothes the same ones she wore the night before. She froze when she saw me, her face a mix of guilt and something else. "You're up early," she said, trying to sound casual. I just stared at her. "Late night." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, Lydia and I had a few too many drinks. I ended up crashing at her place. Didn't want to drive home like that." She said it so smoothly, so convincingly, that if I hadn't seen her with my own eyes, I might have believed her. But I didn't. Instead of confronting her, I played along. "Glad you were safe," I said, forcing a smile. "Next time, just text me so I don't worry." She relaxed a little, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Of course. Sorry about that." I watched her walk upstairs, and all I could think was, "Who are you?" After she left for work, I decided it was time to dig deeper. The tracker on her car had been helpful, but it wasn't enough. I needed more concrete evidence, something that would give me the full picture. So, I hired a private investigator. I found someone online who came highly recommended. A woman named Elaine, who specialized in domestic cases. We met at a small coffee shop on the other side of town where I explained everything. The text from Mark, the hotel receipt, the guy at the gym, and the man I saw her with last night. Elaine listened carefully, taking notes as I talked. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression serious. "This is a tangled web," she said. "But I'll untangle it for you. Give me a week, and I'll have something solid." I handed her a retainer and left, feeling both nervous and relieved. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of the situation. The next few days were weird. Julie acted like nothing was wrong, going about her usual routine with a smile on her face. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something was up. And then, on Thursday night, Elaine called me. "I've got something," she said. "Meet me tomorrow morning." When I arrived at her office, Elaine was waiting with a folder in her hand. She wasted no time getting to the point. "Your wife has been meeting with multiple men," she said, opening the folder to reveal a series of photos. The first was of Julie and Mark, sitting in a car together outside a park. The second was of Julie and the guy from the gym walking into a different hotel. And the third was of Julie and the man from the bar, sitting on a couch inside his house, looking far too comfortable for my liking. "She's not just seeing one guy," Elaine said. "She's juggling at least 3. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "Do you know who they are?" Elaine nodded. "Mark is her ex-boyfriend, which you already know. The guy from the gym is a personal trainer named Alex. And the man from the bar is Stephen Moore, a real estate developer. He's married, by the way." The words hit me like a freight train. Not only was Julie cheating, but she was also involved with a married man. What the hell was going on? But Elaine wasn't finished. She pulled out one last photo. "This one's going to hurt," she said softly. It was a picture of Julie sitting in a cafe with Lydia. They were holding hands. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. Lydia? Her best friend Lydia? Elaine nodded. "It's not just the men, Eric. Your wife is having an affair with her, too." I didn't know what to say. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was living a completely separate life, one that I had no part in. As I sat there in stunned silence, Elaine leaned forward. "What do you want to do next?" "Reddit, I don't know the answer to that question yet. But I do know one thing. The woman I married is a stranger, and I'm about to confront her. I just found out Julie was juggling multiple affairs. Not just with Mark, the trainer Alex, and Steven the real estate guy, but even with her best friend Lydia. It felt like every truth I thought I knew about my life was slipping through my fingers. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to confront her. That night, I waited until the kids were asleep. Julie was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. The sight of her acting so normal, so calm, made my blood boil. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice steady but cold. She looked up, a little surprised. "Sure, what's up?" I sat down at the table across from her, my heart pounding. I'd thought about how to approach this 100 different ways, but in the end, the words just spilled out. "Where were you last night?" Her smile faltered. "I told you I was at Lydia's. We had wine, talked about her crazy work stuff." I cut her off. "Stop lying to me, Julie." Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely nervous. "Eric, what are you talking about?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the photos Elaine had given me. I slid it across the table to her. "I know everything." Julie froze, staring at the screen. The picture of her with Steven at the bar, the one of her with Alex at the hotel, and finally the shot of her holding hands with Lydia at the cafe. Her face went pale. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "The better question is why? Why are you doing this to me? To our family?" She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought I saw tears in her eyes, but they never fell. Instead, she straightened up, her expression hardening. "Eric, it's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "It's exactly what it looks like, Julie. You've been lying to me for months, maybe years. How many of them are there? Just these 3? Or is there more?" She finally found her voice. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, okay? I felt trapped. I needed something more. Something exciting." "Exciting?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You needed something exciting, so you decided to tear apart our marriage? To lie to me, to sneak around like this? What about the kids, Julie? Did you think about them at all?" She flinched, but she didn't answer. "And Lydia?" I pressed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Your best friend, Julie? Was that part of the excitement too?" Her lips trembled, and for the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. "I never wanted it to get this far," she said quietly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "But it did," I said, standing up and pacing the room. "It happened, and now I'm standing here, wondering who the hell I married. I thought we had something real. I thought I could trust you." She buried her face in her hands, finally breaking down into sobs. For a split second, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered all the lies, all the betrayal, and it hardened my resolve. "I want the truth, Julie. All of it. Right now." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I'll tell you everything," she whispered. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Not here," she said, glancing toward the hallway where the kids were sleeping. "Not now. Tomorrow after the family dinner. I'll tell you everything." The family dinner. I'd almost forgotten about it. Julie's parents, her sister, Mark. They were all coming over tomorrow for one of those big, cheerful gatherings that always felt a little forced. The thought of sitting through it now, knowing what I knew, made me sick. But I nodded. "Fine. Tomorrow." She stood up, looking like she wanted to say more, but instead, she just walked past me and disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed up all night, replaying the conversation in my head. She wanted me to wait until after the dinner? Fine. But if she thought she could smooth this over, she was dead wrong. Because here's the thing, Reddit. I wasn't going to wait for her version of the truth. I had a plan of my own. Last night was the wildest, most surreal night of my life. If you've been following along, you know Julie promised to come clean after our family dinner. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her curated version of the truth. I had my own plan, and let's just say it went off the rails. The evening started out normal enough, I guess. Julie's parents arrived first, followed by her sister, and then Mark. I swear, seeing him stroll in like he owned the place made my blood boil. He even brought a bottle of wine, like that would somehow make him less of a scumbag. Julie was playing the perfect hostess, laughing and pouring drinks like she didn't have a care in the world. I tried to keep my cool, but the tension in my chest was building with every passing minute. By the time everyone sat down to eat, I was practically vibrating with anger. I kept glancing at Julie, wondering if she even realized how far I was willing to take this. And then, halfway through dinner, I decided, screw it. I stood up, tapping my wineglass with a fork to get everyone's attention. Can I have a moment? I said, my voice steady but ice cold. Julie looked up at me, her smile faltering. Eric, what are you? Just a quick toast. I cut her off, raising my glass. To family, trust, and honesty. The things that really hold a marriage together. Her sister, Claire, smiled awkwardly. That's nice, Eric. Oh, I'm not done, I said, my eyes locked on Julie. I've been thinking a lot about those things lately, about what it means to trust someone, to believe in them, and what it feels like when they betray you. Julie's face went pale. Eric, don't. But I was already in motion. I walked over to the sideboard where I'd hidden Elaine's folder, the one with all the photos. I slammed it onto the table, making everyone jump. What is this? Her dad asked, frowning. This, I said, flipping it open and pulling out the first photo, is Julie and her ex-boyfriend Mark, caught meeting up at a park. I tossed it onto the table where everyone could see. Gasps rippled around the room. Julie's mom looked horrified, while Claire's jaw dropped. Eric, stop, Julie pleaded, standing up. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said, pulling out the next photo. Here's Julie with Alex, her personal trainer, walking into a hotel together. And this one, that's her with Stephen Moore, married Stephen Moore, looking pretty cozy in his living room. By now, everyone was staring at Julie, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But the final blow was still coming. And if that wasn't enough, I said, pulling out the last photo. Here's Julie with Lydia, her best friend. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Julie's dad stood up, his face red with anger. What the hell is this, Julie? He demanded. I can explain, Julie stammered, tears streaming down her face. Mark, to his credit, looked like he wanted to die. He kept glancing at the door, probably wondering how fast he could get out of there. But I wasn't done yet. And just in case anyone thinks I'm overreacting, I said, pulling out my phone, here are the texts from Mark and Julie. You were amazing the other night. Keep it to yourself. I read them aloud, my voice dripping with sarcasm. At this point, the table was chaos. Julie was crying. Her mom was yelling at her dad to calm down, and Claire was just sitting there, her hands over her mouth. Finally, Julie snapped. Fine, she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. You want the truth, Eric? Here it is. I was unhappy. You were boring, predictable, safe. I needed more than that. And yeah, I screwed up. I screwed up a lot. But you're not perfect either. I just stared at her, stunned. You think this is about me not being perfect? You've been lying to me, to everyone, for months, maybe years. The room fell silent again, and for a moment, I thought she might try to apologize. But instead, she just shook her head and walked out of the room. Mark followed her a moment later, but not before muttering something about needing to clear the air. And just like that, the dinner was over. Her family apologized to me as they left, but I barely heard them. I was too busy staring at the wreckage of my life, wondering how the hell I got here. When I finally went upstairs, Julie was packing a bag. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. She just grabbed her things and left. So, here I am, sitting in an empty house trying to figure out what comes next. I told you about the nuclear fallout at the family dinner. Julie stormed out, Mark trailed behind her, and her family left in a stunned silence. It felt like I'd dropped a bomb on my own life, and I wasn't sure what pieces were left to pick up. I woke up the next morning to an empty house. No note from Julie, no texts, nothing. Just silence. I thought maybe she'd gone to her parents' house or Lydia's, but my gut told me she wouldn't risk the shame of facing her family, or the tension with Lydia after everything came out. That left one obvious option, Mark. I checked the tracker on her car. Sure enough, it pinged at an address I didn't recognize, Mark's place, I assumed. My stomach churned. Part of me wanted to drive over there and drag her out, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. Instead, I focused on next steps. I called Elaine, my private investigator, to fill her in on the fallout. "You've got enough to proceed," she said bluntly. "If you're ready, I'll loop in your divorce lawyer." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Divorce. I'd been so consumed with anger and uncovering the truth that I hadn't really thought about what came next. But Elaine was right. There was no salvaging this. "Do it?" I said, my voice hollow. After that, I needed to clear my head. I spent the day running errands, avoiding the house and its memories. But just as I was about to head home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia. "Can we talk? Please. It's important." The audacity of it made me laugh. Lydia, one of the people who had been complicit in all of this, wanted to talk now? I almost ignored her, but curiosity got the better of me. "Fine," he replied. "My place. 1 hour." When Lydia showed up, she looked different, nervous, maybe even remorseful. She stood on my porch, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "Come in," I said coldly, stepping aside. She walked in and sat on the couch, avoiding my gaze. "I'm so sorry, Eric," she began, her voice shaking. "Save it," I snapped. "Why are you here, Lydia? What could you possibly have to say to me after everything you've done?" She flinched but didn't back down. "You have every right to be angry. I messed up, we messed up. But I didn't come here to justify myself. I came to tell you the truth." "The truth?" I scoffed. "What part of the truth haven't I already uncovered?" Lydia took a deep breath, and then she said something that stopped me cold. "Julie wasn't just cheating on you with me or those guys. There's someone else. Someone you don't know about." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What the hell are you talking about?" She pulled out her phone and opened a series of texts. "There's a man named Peter," she said. "I don't know much about him, but he's the one who introduced Julie to Steven and Alex. He's like some kind of middleman." "A middleman for what?" "For arrangements," Lydia said hesitantly, looking like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. "I think Julie's been meeting men for money." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's ridiculous. Julie wouldn't." "She would," Lydia interrupted, her voice firm. "I didn't know at first, okay? But she told me about it a few months ago. She said it was just a way to feel free, to make extra money for herself. I tried to talk her out of it, but she didn't listen. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a complete shattering of the person I thought I knew. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I can't live with it anymore," Lydia admitted, tears streaming down her face. "You deserve to know. And maybe this will help you move on." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My mind was a mess, spinning with images of Julie, of the lies, of how far she'd gone to destroy everything we built. Lydia left after that, and I spent the rest of the night pacing the house, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, Elaine called with an update. "I've been looking into Steven and Alex," she said. "And Lydia was right. There's a man named Peter who seems to be connected to all of this. Want me to dig deeper?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice hard. Because now, this wasn't just about confronting Julie. It was about uncovering every last piece of this nightmare. I don't even know how to explain how far this rabbit hole has gone. Every time I think I've hit the bottom, the ground caves in a little further. Lydia's revelation about this Peter guy lit a fire in me, and Elaine, my private investigator, wasted no time diving into the details. What she found, it's like something out of a bad movie. Turns out, Peter wasn't just some random guy Julie met. He was part of an underground network. Not quite an escort service, not quite a dating app. Something in between. They called it the Circle. It catered to wealthy men who wanted companionship without strings attached. And Julie? She was on their roster. I got the call from Elaine while sitting in my car, parked outside my office. "I'm sending you some files," she said. "It's worse than we thought." When I opened the email, my stomach dropped. There was Julie, listed under a fake name, Laura S., with photos I recognized from our own vacations and events. She was smiling, looking carefree, wearing outfits I'd bought her. The description next to her profile said things like, fun, spontaneous, adventurous, followed by a list of her preferred arrangements. But the worst part? The activity log. Dozens of appointments. Names redacted, but the dates and times were clear. Some lined up perfectly with the nights she claimed she was working late or meeting Lydia. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling. "How long has this been going on?" I asked Elaine. "At least a year," she replied. "Maybe longer." Peter recruits women from social circles, gyms, events. He finds people who want a little thrill and a little extra money. Once they're in, they keep it quiet or they risk getting exposed. And Mark, Alex, Stephen, all clients, Elaine said. Though Stephen seems to be more than that. He's close to Peter, almost like a recruiter himself. That house you followed her to? Stephen's been hosting these meetings there. My head was spinning. Julie wasn't just cheating on me. She was living an entirely different life, built on lies and manipulation. And then Elaine dropped another bombshell. "Eric, it gets worse. Peter's been blackmailing some of the women." "What?" "He keeps dirt on everyone. Texts, photos, videos. He uses it to make sure they stay in line. If they try to leave or expose him, he ruins them." I could barely process what I was hearing. "Do you think Julie?" "I'm not sure," Elaine said. "But if she's involved with Peter, she might not be able to walk away, even if she wanted to." The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I was furious at Julie for her betrayal, but now I couldn't help but wonder, was she trapped? That night, I decided to confront her again. Julie hadn't come home since the family dinner. I assumed she was still holed up at Mark's or Stephen's place, but I didn't have the patience to wait for her anymore. Using the tracker I'd planted on her car, I found her parked at the same house I'd followed her to before, Stephen's. I drove over, heart pounding, and parked down the street. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the living room. As I approached, I could hear voices, Julie's, Stephen's, and another man's. Peter. I recognized his voice from the recordings Elaine had sent me. Calm, calculated, and oozing arrogance. "You know the rules, Julie," Peter was saying. "You don't just walk away. That's not how this works." "I'm done," Julie replied, her voice shaking. "I can't do this anymore. Eric knows everything." "Then you should have kept your mouth shut," Peter snapped. "You think I won't burn you to the ground? I've got enough on you to ruin your life. Your husband, your kids, your family. They'll all see the real you." My blood boiled. I stepped closer to the window, my fists clenched. "Let her go," Stephen said, his tone cautious. "She's not worth the trouble if she's this much of a liability." "She's too deep," Peter shot back. "She knows too much." Julie's voice broke. "Please, I'll pay you back. Just let me leave." Peter laughed coldly. "You don't get it, do you? You're not leaving. You're mine." I couldn't listen anymore. I marched up to the front door and pounded on it. The voices inside went silent. A moment later, Stephen opened the door, his face twisting in surprise. "Eric!" I shoved past him into the living room, where Julie and Peter stood frozen. Julie's face turned ghost white when she saw me. "Eric," she whispered, "is this what you've been hiding from me?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the room. "Is this who you've become?" Peter smirked, clearly unfazed. "You must be the husband. Nice to meet you." "Shut up," I snapped, turning to Julie. "I want answers. Now." Julie's eyes filled with tears, but before she could speak, Peter stepped forward. "You've got no idea what you're dealing with," he said calmly. "Walk away, and we'll pretend this never happened." "Not a chance," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You've already taken enough from me. This ends now." Peter laughed again, but I wasn't afraid. "Not anymore. Reddit, I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm not backing down. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Elaine and my lawyer to figure out how to take Peter down. Julie might have betrayed me, but no one else is going to destroy my life." After the confrontation at Stephen's house, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. Peter was dangerous, Julie was in deep, and the web of lies and manipulation went far beyond my marriage. The next morning, I met Elaine and my lawyer, David, to plan the next steps. Elaine laid it all out for us. "Peter has dirt on everyone, but he's not untouchable. If we can get concrete evidence, emails, money transfers, anything that links him to this operation, we can take him down. And Julie might be our way in." That's when David spoke up. "Eric, if you're willing, we can use this to leverage the divorce settlement. But this goes beyond just protecting yourself. If Peter's been coercing women, he needs to face the law." I nodded, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Do it, whatever it takes." The plan was risky but simple. Get Julie to cooperate. She was the key to exposing Peter's operation, and as much as I hated what she'd done, I couldn't stand the thought of her being dragged further into his mess. That night, I called Julie and asked her to meet me at the house. She hesitated but eventually agreed. When she walked in, she looked exhausted. Her makeup smudged, her eyes red from crying. "Eric, I don't know what you want me to say," she began, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I've messed up. I know that. But you have to believe me. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Then help me," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Tell me everything about Peter. Every detail, every secret. If you want out of this, you need to start being honest." She hesitated, her hands trembling. "If I talk, he'll ruin me. He has everything, texts, photos. He could send them to you, to my parents, to everyone we know." I leaned forward. "Julie, he's already ruined us. The only way out is to stop him. Do you really think he's going to let you walk away?" She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. "I never wanted this, Eric. I felt like I'd lost myself. And Peter made me feel powerful, like I was in control for once. But it was all a lie." "Then fight back," I said, my voice firm. "Help me take him down." After a long silence, she nodded. The next day, Elaine set up a meeting between Julie and a detective she trusted. With her cooperation, we were able to gather the final pieces of evidence. Bank statements, text exchanges, and even a recording Julie had secretly made of Peter threatening her. And then it was game time. A week later, Peter was arrested in a coordinated sting operation. Turns out, he'd been running a high-level coercion ring for years, using blackmail to control the women in his circle. Stephen, Mark, and several others were also implicated as clients and accomplices. Julie's testimony was crucial in bringing Peter down. She admitted to everything, her role in the operation, the affairs, the lies. She faced consequences too, of course. She lost her job, her reputation, and any remaining trust from her family. But in the end, she helped stop Peter from ruining more lives. As for me, the divorce was finalized 2 months later. I got full custody of the kids, the house, and a clean break from the wreckage of our marriage. Julie moved out of state to start over, though she writes to the kids every so often. It's been 6 months since the dust settled, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't still picking up the pieces. Some days, the anger and betrayal feel fresh, like a wound that refuses to heal. But other days, I wake up feeling lighter, like I finally stepped out from under the shadow of someone else's lies. This whole ordeal taught me a lot. About trust, about resilience, and about the importance of standing up for yourself when everything feels like it's falling apart. So that's it, Reddit. That's the story of how my life imploded and how I started to rebuild. It's not a happy ending, but it's a new beginning. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Thanks for sticking with me through this roller coaster. Stay strong, everyone.